Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, and thank you for joining us for our webcast today. My name is Jennifer Gill, and I'm the Director of Product Marketing at Zerto. And today we're going to be talking about enterprise-class business continuity and disaster recovery in a VMware environment, and touching on how to protect your applications, specifically Tier 1 applications. And before we move on from the first slide, I do like to point out our awards. So we got Best in Show at VMworld, along with a couple of other awards there, as well as a gold award from Search Server Virtualization. So here we have our agenda. We have Dave Simpson with the 451 group to talk about disaster recovery and business continuity, looking at what's going on in the marketplace, challenges, and what solutions are available, as well as requirements. And then I will speak quickly about the Zerto virtual replication software and how that helps you protect your Tier 1 applications. And then finally, we have Mark Montagna from the Philadelphia Contributionship, and he'll talk about his experience with Zerto Virtual Replication and why it was a great fit for their environment. So here we have our speakers. As I mentioned, we have Dave Simpson, who's the Senior Storage Analyst at the 451 Group, who focuses on data protection, disaster recovery, and business continuity. And then myself, Jennifer Gill, I'm the Director here of Product Marketing here at Zerto, and I have 15 years of experience in high-tech marketing and quite a bit with VMware and virtualization. And then Mark Montagna, who's the IT Infrastructure Manager at the Philadelphia Contributionship. He has almost 10 years of experience with VMware and virtualization, more than 15 years of experience in IT specific to very heavy regulated industries like insurance and finance. And the infrastructure that he supports 100 internal users, 400 key agencies, and more than 2,000 agents. So before we jump into Dave's section of the presentation, I'm going to poll the audience really quickly just to see how large your environment is in terms of your virtual machines. So I'll give everyone a few minutes to answer that question. And I'll leave that poll open while I turn it over to Dave Simpson from the 451 Group to talk about disaster recovery and business continuity.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. First, I'd like to thank Zerto for inviting me to share some observations on the current and future state of disaster recovery, business continuity, and from a technical standpoint, replication and virtualization. I'm going to first take a quick look at how large IT organizations are tackling disaster recovery and replication today and what the drawbacks are. And then I put together a wish list of how IT managers would like to be doing disaster recovery and replication. And my observations are based on research that our 451 research division has done on both the vendor and user side, as well as on survey data from one of our other divisions, the InfoPro, which specializes in in-depth surveys and studies of IT professionals, mostly at larger Fortune 1000 companies. And this slide is, in fact, from the InfoPro survey of IT storage managers at mid-sized companies, which we define as companies with revenue between $150 million and $1 billion. And in this instance, we just asked them what their top storage initiatives were for 2012. And my original slide had about 28 top responses to that question, but it was just too messy, so I only listed the top 6 here. And you can see that DR is the number 2 priority. However, I want to elaborate on this a bit based on our conversations with the IT professionals. It's not that all of a sudden in 2012 disaster recovery became important. It's always been important. However, until recently, many IT shops just felt correctly that disaster recovery and replication were simply too expensive. So in previous years in our surveys, disaster recovery was never this high on the priority list. Today, the IT managers are beginning to realize that because of new technologies like virtualization and hypervisor-based replication, as opposed to array-based replication, that disaster recovery is now becoming affordable. So the IT managers are elevating disaster recovery and business continuity on their to-do list, all the way up to number 2 here in 2012. And based on the responses to our questions regarding storage spending, and I didn't include a slide on that, but we expect not only these larger enterprises, but also, and perhaps more importantly, SMBs, to increase their spending on new technologies that give them affordable disaster recovery. And we think that many of the larger IT organizations will consider getting rid of their older replication and DR technologies. And this slide is a follow-on to what I just started talking about. When we ask storage or IT professionals why they haven't implemented DR or why they feel that their DR strategy is lacking, it's almost always because they see it as too expensive or too complex. And they know that if they do DR, they'll have to do DR testing. And they're under the impression that DR testing is way too time-consuming and error-prone. But again, this is because a lot of these end users are still associating disaster recovery with older technologies, such as those on my next slide. Now, there are plenty of lower-cost methods of replication, but at the high end of the market, where you need to get as close as you can to zero data loss, zero RTO or recovery time objective, and zero RPO or recovery point objective, until recently, the only way to go has been array-based or hardware-based replication. And I've put some of the more popular high-end DR replication products on this slide. Now, you can do this less expensively by going with software-based replication, but then you give up the very low RTO and RPO. So going back to array-based replication, all of these tools here are good. They're very good. In some cases, they've been refined over literally decades. However, there's a few drawbacks. Number one, they're extremely expensive. The licensing costs, the software licensing costs, are very high, but the real kicker is that you have to have homogeneous or identical arrays on both sides of the replication chain at the primary or production site and the secondary or DR site. And if you're talking a symmetrics class array, you're talking big bucks. And the other big downside to these array-based replication tools is they're quite complex. And because some of the process is manual, you need high-paid specialists to make sure it gets done right. I borrowed this slide from Zerto because I couldn't have put it together myself, but this is showing what's involved in array-based replication. And this particular example is using EMC's recover point, not its high-end SRDF, as an example. But in addition to the complexity, this slide is also showing the interaction that's required between the virtualization team, which is shown on the top of the slide there, and the storage team, which is shown at the bottom there. However, there's an alternative to this approach, and that's hypervisor-based replication. This is where you move the replication function away from the hardware array or storage level and up the stack into the hypervisor itself. Again, I borrowed this slide from Zerto, but what it's showing in the same virtualized CRM application, how much simpler it is with the hypervisor-based approach. You still have to have some interaction and coordination between the virtualization team and the storage team, but you can see that it can become a relatively simple 5-step process as opposed to that 17-step or whatever on the previous slide. But the other two key advantages of hypervisor-based replication are that A, you don't have to replicate two identical arrays. You can replicate the dissimilar arrays that are much less expensive or that maybe you already have. And B, the software itself is much less expensive, yet you still get all the features that you'd get if you used array-based replication. And we'll dive deeper into the hypervisor-based replication in the other presentations, so I'll get off that bandwagon here and turn for a moment to why this is all so important at this particular juncture in time. Now, one of the clear barriers to virtualizing mission-critical applications is, in fact, business continuity and disaster recovery, because many solutions don't meet the needs of virtualized Tier 1 applications. You can see here that there are some mission-critical apps virtualized, but we're still well under 50%. The point here is that BC and DR need to be in place in order for IT organizations to virtualize Tier 1 applications. And this is another slide from the Info Pro where we asked IT managers which application types they were virtualizing. And most people, of course, started out virtualizing in test and dev environments and web servers, but increasingly they're virtualizing ERP, CRM, OLTP, and e-commerce, all the mission-critical stuff. Big trend for 2012. And again, disaster recovery in a virtual world requires all the functionality that you might have had in the physical world. Now, you can roll your own DR in the cloud with an external, internal, or hybrid cloud architecture, or you can go through an ISP, MSP, or cloud services provider via the DR as a service model. And that option can be even less expensive because a lot of the third-party services providers are discovering these new technologies like hypervisor-based replication. Plus, they have even greater economies of scale than you might have, so they can pass on those savings. So we think that DR as a service is a very good fit for the IT service providers, and we think that most or all of them will move towards the DR as a service model. And in that context, you may need additional functionality from your DR replication scheme, like multi-tenancy and multi-site replication, but to the end users out there, I would definitely urge you to consider the third-party option for DR. And again, this slide is not specific to disaster recovery, but I think you'd agree that these factors, which represent the driving forces behind why IT is adopting the cloud model, whether it's private, public, or hybrid, apply equally well to DR and BC as they do to cloud computing in a more general context. And BCDR technology that supports the cloud enables you to leverage the power of virtualization in your environment in terms of further cost reductions, and you can more easily meet your SLA requirements. Which brings me to my last slide. Now, based on all these factors and from what we heard from the IT professionals during our InfoPro surveys, I tried to put together an IT wish list in the context of disaster recovery and business continuity. And one thing I haven't mentioned is automation, and we know that not every IT manager wants to automate all IT tasks. Some of them prefer having some level of manual control, although it's my opinion that that's often just because they trust themselves more than they trust software. But I think that if you can convince them that certain business critical tasks, most notably in this context, disaster recovery, if you can convince them that they can in fact be automated, then almost everybody would prefer the automation route. And you may not be able to automate all DR tasks. If you think back to those slides where I showed the DR process going from 17 or so steps to 5 steps, you recall that you still need some human intervention and interaction, but you can certainly automate more of the process compared to the more traditional methodologies. And the second point here is rather obvious, cost reduction. But again, this is even more critical in virtual environments because cost reduction is one of the main reasons they're virtualizing in the first place. And third, and these aren't in any particular order, but ideally these IT managers want to have integration of the disaster recovery or replication software with existing hypervisor management tools. In the case of VMware, that would obviously be vCenter, VCD, or vCloud Director, vMotion, StorageMotion, etc. And this is primarily so you can achieve some of that automation I just talked about, but also so that VMware administrators, rather than storage experts, can take over more and more of the DR tasks. Fourth, and we'll get into this deeper, replication at the hypervisor level, in part because it enables you to eliminate the need for expensive disk arrays on the replicated side of the equation, but also in part because this approach is integrated with the VMware Management Console. Again, just making it easier to do this stuff. And finally, just as in the physical world, you need to be able to guarantee SLAs, near zero data loss, minimum RPO and RTO, which these days ideally should be measured in minutes or seconds, according to what these IT professionals have been telling us. So with that, I'd like to turn it back to Jennifer. Jennifer.
Thanks, Dave. So we are going to kick it off with a new poll. And similar to what Dave was discussing, we'd like to know what type of disaster recovery technologies you're using. None, which may be the case. Array-based replication, guest, or OS-based, backup-based, or hypervisor-based. And so I will leave that poll open while I talk a little bit about Zerto virtual replication. So if we look at an overview of Zerto, we really specialize in business continuity and disaster recovery for virtualized environments and the cloud. We have a very strong background in BCDR. The company, the founders of Zerto also founded a company called Kasha, which is now EMC RecoverPoint. And when they were designing RecoverPoint, it became really clear that although it's a great solution for physical environments, when you start to look at a virtual environment, there were quite a few gaps there. And so they leveraged this experience to build a BCDR solution ideally suited for Tier 1 enterprise class applications in a virtualized environment and in the cloud. And if we look at what virtualization changed, basically the building block of a virtualized environment is the hypervisor. It's probably not news. And anything that you do in a virtualized environment outside of the hypervisor, like replication, really undermines the value of virtualization. So all those benefits that you got, the financial benefits in terms of your total cost of ownership, or in terms of technical benefits like simplicity, those tend to go away because you're introducing a physical solution into your virtual IT strategy, so your strategy is not aligned. Other companies have recognized the benefit of moving functionality into the hypervisor. If you look at Cisco with networking, for example, so they create virtual switches because it just plays nicer in a virtual environment. Moving things into the hypervisor enables you to kind of continue to realize those gains that you saw initially. So if you saw a greater TCO, a lower TCO, or better technical benefits, if you're able to extend your virtualization strategy to your BCDR strategy, now you realize even greater gains. Zerto is the only solution that's recognized this and moved BCDR functions into the hypervisor so you can fully realize the benefits of virtualization and the cloud. So when we talk about Zerto virtual replication, it's the only virtual aware solution, and what we mean by that is we replicate VMs and VMDKs only. We don't replicate LUNs, for example. It's a software-only solution, so it integrates seamlessly into your environment. No hardware or software configuration changes are required. And yet, with all this flexibility within the product, you still get an enterprise class product. You still get very low RPOs and RTOs. You get a solution that's aware of the virtualized applications in your environment, and you get a solution that provides point-in-time recovery. You have the strength of like an SRDF or a RecoverPoint for replication, plus all the automation of SRM for a complete solution fully designed and integrated into your VMware environment. So if we look at the key differentiators, so we already talked about the VM granularity, so we replicate virtual machines. We have full integration into vCloud Director and vCenter, and you can also replicate between different versions of vSphere, so vSphere 4 to vSphere 5 or vSphere 5 to vCloud Director. It's hardware agnostic, so you can replicate from SAN to NAS, from EMC to IBM, from NetApp to HP. The storage, it doesn't matter what you have there. Zerto can replicate within that environment. It's enterprise class, so we deliver very low RPOs and RTOs, RPO of seconds and RTOs of just a few minutes. We provide application consistent replication and recovery through consistency groups to ensure that your BCDR policies are applied consistently across all the VMs that make up a Tier 1 application, because typically you do have more than 1 or 2 VMs that are supporting a very large application. It has point-in-time recovery, so you can recover to any point in time between 2 hours and 5 days worth of data. So for example, if you have a logical corruption and you want to replicate to a point prior to that corruption, that's available. And we've done a lot of benchmark testing to ensure that there's no performance impact. Because when you're talking about an application that's touching customers or generating revenue, we want to make sure we don't impede the performance in any way. Simple and automated, and Dave touched on this in his presentation, that having the automation is really key, especially when you get to an enterprise class application, because you want to make sure everything's repeated and consistently done and done correctly. So Zerto automates failover and failback, and again, it's a software-only solution. And lastly, we'll touch on the scalability, so it scales from just a few VMs, and we do have customers who have, 8, 10, 15 VMs, to very large customers who have thousands of VMs that they're protecting with Zerto. And the installation is seamless, automated in many respects. It takes less than an hour to install Zerto into your environment. And so if we look at the different types of replication solutions, you can see the scale here. So we have enterprise class, and how we define that as Zerto is the very low RPOs and RTOs, the consistency groups, and the point-in-time recovery, and those other features that you really need for your most important applications. And then you have virtual aware. So how aware of what goes on in the VMware environment is the solution. So you have array-based, which delivers those very low RPOs and RTOs, but isn't virtual aware. You have to turn off features like DRS and vMotion. And then you kind of have a group over here on the left-hand side that are not as enterprise class, so you're not going to get the very low RPOs and RTOs, but maybe are a little bit more virtual aware as you get to guest-based and snapshot-based, so you can see VMs within the environment and things like that. And then we get to hypervisor-based replication. So there are other solutions in the market that are hypervisor-based, but they don't deliver an RPO of single-digit seconds and an RTO of less than 5 minutes. They deliver in the order of 15 minutes, 20 minutes for an RTO at the minimum, and then an RPO around that same time as well. With Zerto, you get the single-digit seconds, single-digit minutes, as well as fully integrated into your virtual environment. And then just to touch quickly on a couple of the key features, if you have more than one site, we support multi-site replication. So you might have your 2 traditional data centers here. You can see data center A and data center B. But you might have many other smaller offices that also have very important applications, and they need to be protected. With the multi-site, you're able to support that. You're also maybe to introduce a cloud service provider if you'd like to try DR as a service. And then also we support secure multi-tenancy. So you can replicate from all these sites to one shared infrastructure securely to really continue to maximize your environment. Okay, so before we move on to Mark, I am just going to close out our current poll and open up our last poll for the session. And here we talk about what your disaster recovery challenges are. So is it just the cost, again, the duplicate arrays at each site in addition to all the services and software that goes along with it, the complexity of the environment, the storage organizations, so they're matching VMs to LUNs and things like that to make sure that you are replicating what you need to do, but you might be over-replicating, again, if you're replicating at the LUN level, and then just general policy management. And lastly, reaching your RTO and RPO goals, so the challenges within your environment. So I'll leave that open through the end of the presentation, and I will turn it over to Mark Montagna.
Thank you, Jennifer. Hello, everyone. As Jennifer stated, I work for the Philadelphia Contributionship. We are located in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and brief background on our company, we were founded in 1752 by Benjamin Franklin. So we share a very unique tradition that we've been in business for over 260 years. And the modern version of the Contributionship, we currently employ about 100 people, We have a network of roughly 400 to 450 agencies, and we total roughly 2,000 agents that interact with us on a daily basis. Our core product today, almost as it was 260 years ago, is still homeowners insurance. For the most part, we are an extremely mature and old company that has been around a long time and has seen a lot of technology. Our current environment today, we're currently pushing about 4 terabytes of data between 2 data centers at the moment. As Jennifer had stated earlier, we are an insurance company, and we are very heavily regulated in terms of the handling and the maintenance of that, and as far as the amount of protection surrounding the data and the information of our customers. We have been working with Zerto for about 8 months, and we're currently protecting certain applications, document management, file server management environment, accounts payable and receivable for our financing department, SharePoint environment, and basically, the more administrative network that surrounds our core business units, so that we can continue to function on a daily basis. I came to the Contributionship in 2010 and inherited a company all of 260 years old that was struggling from a physical server footprint that was located in one data center to a company that did not have a DR plan. It had a DR plan, but it was never tested. It was never really engaged or exercised to determine if that DR plan was even going to work. We decided at the time that we needed to focus on our data centers. As many companies have done, we decided to virtualize due to the physical footprint of our existing data center, which was very old, very outdated, was having cooling issues, power issues. So we began the process of virtualizing the entire environment. Currently today, we are 100% virtualized. Roughly a small environment from some of the people that are on this call today, but we have about 100 VMs right now that we manage over multiple data centers. Some of the best reasons for virtualization for us, obviously, fast provisioning, resource management, CPU, RAM, the ability to manage our environment is much simpler today than it was just a few years ago. And obviously, there's better high availability and disaster recovery capability available to us in a virtual environment than we had with the physical environment. Our ability to replicate the entire virtual server to remote data centers is something that we were very interested in once we virtualized, and we spent quite a bit of time looking into that and trying to find what fit us best. So prior to Zerto, prior to having anything in place, we began to enhance our environment. We kind of patchwork things, and we had multiple HCA and DR and business continuity recovery methods in place. VMs were backed up to date. They were stored off-site for DR. We were just kind of patching things in there in the beginning, using VFS for replication for unstructured data, pre-staging VMs. Just anything we could do to kind of to spread out our risk without having a real true enterprise solution in place. The DR, the business continuity plan was simply to just to rebuild the entire environment from scratch at a recovery location that we leased, which is very, very expensive for us. In that, if our environment or if our headquarters location went down, we were basically going into a recovery center and building our environment from scratch. The restoration process, the run books we had for that type of environment to rebuild them were very proprietary, extremely complex. RPOs and RTOs, it doesn't really do it justice to say they were high. They were just unheard of. It was a matter of, well, when it's back, it's back. When we're restored, we're restored. And the actual recovery plan itself, without any enterprise-type replication process or anything to really protect the environment, was very expensive to maintain because of the amount of downtime that the RTOs were so high that we would do so much business during that recovery point that it would be just actually quite difficult to actually calculate. So, not to mention the recovery center that we were leasing hardware from in the event we would need it. So, pre-Zerto, it was a very difficult time for us. The challenges that we had, again, the RTO, the RPO measured in days. The DR plan was based on server and data restoration from tape. Recovery process was extremely complex. We began the process of looking at, from our array vendors, from our SAN vendors, we began the process. We knew where we needed to go. We knew what we wanted to do. It was a matter of getting it done and getting the data where we wanted it to be. We began, where I would assume that a lot of people begin in the array-based or snapshot-based software packages that are available today. And some of the impacts of those, the array-based replication that we tested, it was very unsatisfactory for our network, what we had from a standpoint of WAN bandwidth, from our capability of getting data from point A to point B. Traditional array-based and software-based replication just was not working for us. The upgrades that were required of our network from a standpoint of bandwidth were very costly. Once we got the snapshots and we were vaulting them or replicating them to the other site, we still had to deal with the ability to stand those environments online, bring those environments online in the event of a disaster, which SRM capability. We were finding that with the traditional array-based and even some of the software snapshot-based products that exist today, we were finding that snapshot technology was not accurately calculating the true rate of change in a VM. We were finding that servers that were sitting idle online in our testing environment in our labs, when we were snapping them, and a half hour later or an hour later snapping them again, the deltas were huge, and it just really did not accurately, as we felt, calculate that rate of change. Again, like I said, getting that data to the other data centers required that the manual and the complex failover and failbacks processes. We were simply getting the data there, but at that point we had to bring that online. We had to make that presentable for the users, and that was becoming a very complex process that was going to require more cost. The storage costs that we were facing, just because we had to have, from our SAN environment, we had to have the same vendor, same storage for snapshot capability. We were finding that those costs it just was piling on top of us. Mandatory testing, very difficult without having a full plan in place, without having the ability to really have that end-to-end solution in place where we could replicate it, B, we could bring it online and test it without impacting production, was very difficult to do. And again, the RPOs and the RTO targets were not met, because the amount of data we were pushing across a WAN pipe, which for some may be large, for some may be small, we're looking at a 20 meg WAN pipe at the time from point A to point B, and which would then enter in compression tools like Riverbed or WAS or something that we needed to compress that data just to get it across, because we weren't able to get it across in the time frames that we needed. We weren't going to be able to make the RPOs, we weren't able to meet the business requirement. And the RTOs were still not met, because we still had to come up with solutions to get them online, and from time of failure to bringing it back online, we weren't able to meet those time frames. So we came across Zerto, and like I said, we've been with them now roughly, I want to say 6 to 8 months, sometime back in early fall. And quite honestly, there was nobody else out there that was doing what Zerto was doing, and the way in which they were doing it at the hypervisor level. Just about every product we came across and everything we've tested, from array-based to software-based snapshot solutions, there was nothing else out there that was giving us that ability to replicate, and what Zerto said they could do for us, to give us RPOs in seconds and in minutes. So we basically worked into a very small portion of our environment. We brought online with them 10 of our VMs as a test bed, so basically a tenth of our environment we brought online with Zerto. And as Jennifer had stated earlier, the implementation, the installation was very, very quick, very, very easy. No more than a morning, no more than an hour actually to get it installed, but no more than a couple hours with Zerto engineers and getting us to a point where we understood what was going on and the installation process. They worked with us from start to finish. We basically were replicating these 10 testbed servers within 2 days. We had a good majority of it seated at the other data center. The impact to our bandwidth was very, very minimal. Other than the initial synchronization, the initial seeding was very, very minimal to us. And right off the bat, it was more of a proving process from Zerto because we just really didn't believe. We were waiting for that other, the hammer to fall that said, oh, well, there's the limitation. There's what it can't do. And we worked from start to finish. The process was, like I said, about 8 months. And we basically did not have to upgrade our environment. Our network upgrades were not necessary. We didn't need to increase bandwidth. We eliminated monthly recurring costs with our remote offsite recovery, where we were leasing a recovery site to just have hardware in place in the event we needed it. Those costs began to go down because we were able to readjust those schedules so that we didn't have to have all this hardware sitting waiting to come online if we needed it to recover from tape. There was no need for identical storage environments, which was great. So older SAN environments that we had, we were able to bring online and use that. It's agnostic to the storage. It doesn't care when replicating what SAN environments it's going to. And if anything, the increased utilization rates across storage for us, we had the ability at that point to like I said, bring in some storage that we were offlining, that we were trying to find a use for. We were actually saving money because we weren't looking at having to go out and increase our storage. So from a replication standpoint and a snapshot perspective, we weren't consuming so much storage for the snapshot or the replication volumes that we would need to carve out just to replicate. We were able to open up that storage and utilize it for what we needed it for, and not necessarily just putting the replication and snapshot volumes in place. Our RTOs, the RTO basically went to minutes, and I'll get to that towards the end, but our RPO, as far as, we basically had a 8 to 10 second RPO at any given time throughout the day, depending on whether or not there's been an I/O burst, depending on the amount of transactions that are hitting the system. But for all intents and purposes, we have a recovery point objective for the 10 servers that we had been that we initially started with. RPOs are in seconds. The ability to demonstrate the BCDC or DR process worked as promised, which was great for us. The ability to test it, validating that to the business and showing the business it's kind of like pushing a big red button and failing it all over. That was huge for us, and that was something again that we had to test, and we had to make sure that from start to finish, the final part of it being that we could test it, we could bring it online, we could see everything, and we could do whatever we needed to do with it. When we were done with the testing, we could bring it down, simply destroying the VM that it brought up for testing. Nothing changed in the background. We continued to replicate. And as well, the management console that allows us to do all this, whether it's at our DR site or here, it's all built into vCenter. It's a single point of management, and it allows us. It has all the SRM capabilities that we need built right in. We can re-IP a VM when it fails over. We can drop it into a specific vSwitch or VLAN that we determine that's where we want to test it, or that's where it's going to go in the event of a disaster. So the actual improvements with Zerto were exponential. We went from being very frustrated with trying to get the data from point A to point B. We couldn't get it there, and we still hadn't even thought about how we were going to stand it up. We knew we had SRM is something we could use, but we hadn't even gotten that far. So this really brought it all together for us, and it allowed us to really focus on other aspects of the continuity plan too. So it wasn't just so much bringing the technical environment back home, but it freed us to go do more with our plan. The changes and improvements, as I said before, there were no network upgrades required. The monthly recurring costs went away, but ultimately we now have a complete BCDR solution. Now we intend to expand on that in this upcoming year. We've been through our testing with it over the last 8 months, and we're effectively protecting and replicating 4 terabytes of those VMs from point A to point B across a 20 meg link. With little or no impact to that bandwidth, other than the depending on the amount of volume that's coming through at any given point during the day. But for the most part, we have not had any issues whatsoever with bandwidth, and again, keeping our RPOs in the seconds, which have been huge for us. So for us, the results that we're able to simplify the entire process. We've been able to replace, at least with the servers that we've since replicated, all those other proprietary methods that we were using and consolidate them to Zerto. We're able to fully automate failover and recovery of virtual machines. We can test it. I can fail them over at any time I want in just a test mode, and basically have the comfortability that in the event of a disaster, we know what we have to do. It's an organized process and not a chaotic process. We've reduced capital expenditures because we're not looking at more SAN storage. We're not looking at additional hardware or software at this point in time until we start to ramp up the remaining servers in our environment. And there was no configuration changes required in the environment, which was great as well. And the addition of the need to keep our bandwidth where it was without having to increase that expense was met as well. And on the 18th of May, we have a disaster recovery test twice a year. On the 18th of May, we were able to fail over and fully recover 10 of those VMs, which took us 10 minutes to do. They were online, ready to go within 10 minutes. And in the past, that 4 terabyte of data to restore from tape would have been probably 10 to 18 hours to get that all back up and configured and ready to go. So it has absolutely positively exceeded our expectations. And even though we're only testing 10, or I should say not testing, we are actually in full production with it. Even though we only have 10 right now, we have plans to expand fully out to every server that needs to be protected. And from a scalability perspective, we have no concern whatsoever for that. So that basically was the experience that we had, and we've been extremely happy, in fact, far exceeding our expectations. So with that, I can turn it back to Jennifer.
Thanks, Mark. So we talked a lot today about Zerto Virtual Replication, hypervisor-based replication, how it's ideally suited for your enterprise-class environments. I do see that we have questions, so I'll make sure we get to as many of those as we can. But I do just want to put up my contact information. So if you need anything else or would like more information on Zerto, feel free to drop me an email at any time. So, Mark, there is one question. Well, there are quite a few questions, but here's one for you specifically. It says, are you still on a 20 megabits per second pipe, or was it 20 megabytes per second? I think
20 megabits per second pipe. And yes, we still are. And we do have plans to increase that incrementally. And basically, the savings that we had with Zerto allowed us to bump that up to, we had plans to increase that in a very small fraction. We don't need to go, 100 megabit pipe or anything like that. So yes, we still are.
Okay, great. And then here's another question for you, Mark. Would you describe a key feature or two that Zerto provided that the native VMware tools did not do for you?
So I'm not really sure how to answer that question when you say the native VMware tools, if you're referring to like host-based replication in vSphere 5. Zerto, from a standpoint of replication, the VMware tools really don't come into play in this particular instance because we are literally just seeding the VMDK on at the other site. And Zerto takes care of bringing that, when we fail over in test, it brings the VM online, registers the VM, and it makes it available for production. So there's really not VMware tools really don't come into play there unless you're referring to the host-based replication, which is, I guess, could be compared, but it's host-based replication still has limitations that Zerto exceeds from the standpoint of RPOs. I think host-based replication has a 15-minute RPO capability, or so they say, but I believe it is still snap-based technology compared to Zerto, which is at that hypervisor stack level.
Okay, great. And here was a question on scalability, and it said that the speaker said he recovered 10 VMs in 10 minutes, but about 500 VMs, would that be 500 minutes? And I'll answer that question. Mark, you can, if you have a thought.
I mean, when I say 10 minutes, it was just a matter of, the amount of time it took to click, fail over. It built the VM, registered the VM, and brought it online. Each VM was roughly a minute. Now, when I say 10 minutes, it was part of a test. They were all going at the same time, so technically it could be even faster than 10 minutes. It's just that's how we proceeded during the test. So when you're failing over, we failed over one at a time. That was 10 minutes. We could have failed them all over at the same time and significantly decreased that time.
Yeah, so and just to add to that, I was just going to say it kind of depends on your environment, and certainly if you want to reach out to me, we could have a discussion because that is, mileage does vary a little bit, based on your network requirements and other things that you have there. And another question, this one looks like it was for me. Someone asked how the product integrates with SRM. You actually don't need SRM if you have Zerto Virtual Replication. So it includes all the automation and things like that you get with Zerto, and then it has the replication feature there as well. So it's a complete soup to nuts BCDR replication and recovery product. And then I think we might have time for one more question. Someone asked, okay, how can I see the product? So if you send me an email, I can take care of that for you. And it's just jennifer@zerto.com. And then I think we can probably squeeze in one more for Mark. And it said, what is the geographic location of the source and target environments?
So in our environment right now, that geographic span is very small. We locate it basically in a metro environment, so across the city is the other data center that we're replicating to, with plans to replicate that across a larger geographic span. So right now that is very small, but for all intents and purposes, I'm not sure necessarily, other than latency, which would obviously play a big part in that. I'm not really sure if that really is going to be that impactful, depending on, like I said, how far away you want to replicate.
Okay, great. And I'm going to take one more question just because that's a really quick one. Someone was asking about automated failback within Zerto. Yes, it does include automated failback. So it's automated failover, automated failback, and as Mark mentioned, it's the one click to test anytime. So I know we didn't get to all your questions today. They are still coming in fast and furious. Unfortunately, we are out of time. But if you want to email me directly, I can certainly get you the answers to your questions that you need. I just want to thank Dave and Mark for their time today. I thought their information was really great. And thank you again for all of you spending time with us this afternoon. Thank you so much, and have a great day.